Welcome back to the Postpartum Plan podcast. This podcast is designed to support and empower you through postpartum. Whether you're expecting, in the early postpartum days, or beyond, this space is for you. I'm your host, Madison Fugere, a dedicated postpartum doula and pediatric sleep consultant, striving to help parents feel confident and supported in their parenting journey. Each week, I'm sharing practical tips and expert advice to help you navigate all the postpartum things with confidence. Well, as much confidence as you can. Let's embark on this journey together, making your parenthood as serene and supportive as possible. Today, I'm joined by Dr. Emily, who's a licensed clinical psychologist and a certified perinatal mental health provider. Together, we are talking all about how to prepare your partnership for postpartum and specifically talking about perinatal mental health disorders and how you can feel as prepared with all of the different things that you need if you were to experience any of that postpartum. Emily is the owner of Phoenix Health, and it is a telehealth therapy practice. So if you are looking for some support, whether you are prenatal or postpartum, definitely check out her information as she is helping so many people across the United States. I'm so excited. Thank you for joining me today, Emily.
Thank you for having me.
I'm excited to chat about today's topic. It's something we were just mentioning how it's something I hear about with families all the time is like how to really prepare for postpartum. It's actually something that's in the questionnaire I give my clients, kind of, which is like, how did you feel about your own upbringing and your own parenting style that was, brought upon you? And then how are you going to bring that into your own family? And how do you think that's going to affect your relationship with your partner, right? So I'm excited to kind of dive into that kind of realm of things and topic and help people to kind of prepare for that. Before we dive into it all, though, do you want to tell everybody a little bit about yourself and how you got into the work that you do?
Sure. So I'm a psychologist and a perinatal mental health specialist, which basically just means that I have some extra training and specialization in working with families that are going through everything from infertility to pregnancy loss, throughout the pregnancy, postpartum process, and then even postpartum. And I really got into this work through my own experience. When I had my first child, I was working as a psychologist at the time, and I was really naive in thinking that, I was aware of perinatal mental health, I was aware of the stats, but I was really naive in thinking that it would never happen to me. And then when I experienced my own postpartum depression, I was really blindsided by it. And it took me a really long time to admit that that's what was happening and to finally reach out for help. So I figured if I was feeling a lot of these things and had internalized stigma, a lot of people must be experiencing that. So that really led me, once I was able to heal from my own postpartum depression, to pivot the work that I was doing and respecialize in this area.
That's super, super important. I think your point of explaining though too that you knew that these things could happen, but didn't know they could happen to you, I think is such a relatable thing, right? I feel like parents are often saying oh yeah, I knew it was a thing, but I didn't think it would happen to me. Or, my friend had that, but I thought I'd be fine. I knew about it, so I wouldn't experience it. And then also it takes people time to realize that even if you know kind of what these different mood disorders can look like after having a little one, right? Trying to recognize it within yourself and then actually acknowledging it and learning to heal from that in that process is very different than just knowing that it exists.
Exactly. Yeah. Sometimes you think you can outsmart it, or, I'm too smart for that. I'm too motivated for that. I'm too type A to get that. There's all sorts of kind of wonky beliefs that we can have that going into it that can make us more blindsided. And you're right. It manifests differently for different people too.
Right.
So I think a lot of us have an image of a mom who's crying, having difficulty bonding with her baby. And postpartum depression can certainly look like that, but there are other ways that it could present that I think that we don't really talk enough about. So people aren't aware that could be a thing.
Absolutely. And I think that kind of how we're diving into the approach of these types of topics nowadays and educating people on them can be helpful, right? But I also think that a big part of it is that prenatal prep for this postpartum period, right? Is being aware of what's happening, but also having the people around you aware of what could happen and being aware of the signs to look out for. And I think some of that really does pull into like preparing for postpartum yourself, but also like as a partnership if you're, going into it with a partner. And which is kind of what we're diving into today, which I think is going to be also super important because we also know that not only can like these mood disorders affect birthing people, but like partners also experience this too, right? So I think it's really kind of cool to kind of bring up this perspective of, okay, how do we prepare for this like as a partnership, right?
Yeah, I get asked a lot by clients, what can I do if I know I'm at higher risk of PPD or PPA or another perinatal mental health condition? What can I do? And I always tell them you can't guarantee that you're not going to get it. We can't predict why some people get it. We understand risks, but we can't make it predictions or guarantees. But there are certain things that you can do to set yourself up to
Mhm.
lower your risk factors. And one of them is collaborating with your partner on a plan and talking about how, as a partnership, you're going to go into parenthood and support one another.
I love that. Now, when you're working with families, because I know you said that you do work with families prenatally and kind of during that, even pre-prenatally, right? During that, like, different stages of this perinatal space, right? And what are some of the things that you're typically suggesting to partnerships to go over and to collaborate on prior to bringing babies into the world?
Well, one of the things you had actually mentioned earlier was how your own, parenting, how you were parented as a child might impact how you feel you want to parent your child. And I can't tell you how many couples don't really have that conversation about how they want to parent. Um,
Hmm.
and if you can introduce that conversation, before you get pregnant or while you're
Yeah.
pregnant or your postpartum, that can be quite helpful so that each person can kind of share how they would like to parent, what are their thoughts on discipline, what are their thoughts on, just everything, really. I was just listening to someone speak the other day about how him and his wife, um, had very different thoughts on what to feed their child. Like one was a
Mm.
vegetarian and the other was not, and how they didn't realize until their kids were there that they had these very different opinions on how to feed the child. So having those conversations earlier and kind of working out the kinks
Hmm.
would be quite helpful.
Absolutely. And I hear like even with my own clients, not specifically related to this, but really related to everything, I hear a lot of the first time parents being like the I don't know what I don't know phrase, right? And I think that relates a lot to these types of topics because I think, parents don't know what to ask because they haven't experienced it, or they don't know what to talk about because they haven't had the situations come up. And so I think like to your point of a lot of people don't talk about it, and I think they just kind of assume that, oh, well, when it comes up, we'll talk about it then. But it's so hard to talk about those types of topics that people may or may not be very passionate about or very emotional over when you're in the moment, because it's very easy, especially when you're in the early stages of parenting and you're sleep deprived too, right?
Yeah.
It becomes very much of an emotional and very accusatory sometimes conversations, whereas having those prenatally or those conversations prior to these types of emotions rising, I think they can be a lot more of like a rational partnership, us against the problem kind of
Mhm.
conversation, right? So are there specific topics, like obviously you just mentioned like parenting is a big one, but do you have like specific parts or top of topics or parts of parenthood that you tell people that it is important to talk about together?
Well, definitely your thoughts, feelings, and opinions on parenting is super important. Another one that I think is really important is talking about, particularly for the birthing partner, especially if the birthing partner is at higher risk of a perinatal mental health condition, talking about how the partner can support them, what
Mm,
the signs are of a perinatal mental health condition, and how that particular person wants or needs to be supported. Because sometimes I'm sure you see this in your work too. The partner might feel like they're supporting the birthing person, but that person might not be experiencing the way
right.
they're trying to support them as support. So a conversation about support to me looks like this.
Hmm.
So they have that information going into it, I think is very helpful.
That's a really great point. Yeah, I do think that kind of like, it's like go back to like almost like the love language conversation, right?
Yes.
About like, okay, like how you may tell somebody that you love them may not be the way that they feel love. So like, yes, understanding, how can you support somebody in a way that's going to actually be beneficial to them versus what are you doing that you might think might be, but isn't. So that's really very important. I love that you brought that up. Very cool. Okay. Now, when we're talking about preparing like the partnership itself, are there things that the partner can be doing that kind of helps them to prepare for this? Because I know a lot of the time when we're talking about prenatal prep, we're talking a lot more about the actual person who's giving birth doing a lot more. But then I find a lot of the partners are like, I don't really know what to do once the baby gets here, right? And it's a lot less of an emotional connection for partners. So do you find that there's anything that partners themselves can kind of like prepare for and do to help their partnership as a whole? I know you mentioned, yeah, understanding flags for mental health and supporting them through that. But do you suggest things to people once baby is here that can kind of help them to stay connected?
That's a great question. Yeah, I think, it's very different for each person. Like sometimes I work with partners and they're super involved in everything. And they want to be in it. And then others kind of take more of a step back, or some take on more of their contribution might be, preparing the house, preparing the
Mm,
nursery, like more of that like provider or financial.
yeah.
Um, I think people should definitely lean into what feels comfortable to them. Um, but in terms of things post baby, um, I think checking in with the birthing partner is super important, and checking in with yourself as a partner. So we're touching a little bit on the fact that partners are also at risk for perinatal mental health conditions, something
Mhm.
that's not really talked about a ton, but we know in terms of fathers, it's about 1 in 10, we estimate, experience a perinatal mental health condition like postpartum depression. So being aware of the signs that could come up for you as a partner, and if you are at risk, putting um, resources in place to help you, like whether that's getting into therapy proactively, making sure that you're checking in with your support system, checking in with your partner, having date nights, whatever it is that kind of fills up your cup is also super important because your mental health as a partner matters too.
Right, right. I think it's so easy for people to get into this kind of rut of like once baby's here, their sole, purpose in life is to be a parent, right? And as much as it is really, really important, because obviously there's a child relying on you that can't do things for themselves, it's also so important for people to recognize that they're still individuals and they're still a partnership too. So like you just saying now about like, yeah, it's important to kind of take care of yourself and it's important to go on date nights or whatnot. I think is important to remember, especially when it can feel so overwhelming and it can feel really selfish for a lot of people to take that time for themselves or for their partnership. I know a lot of people feel really anxiety provoked over leaving their kiddo for the first time or, at all, right? And so I think kind of remembering that like you can't be fully there for another tiny human and taking care of them fully if you're not taking care of yourself, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. I had an aha moment not too long ago, and my kids right now, they're 4 and 6, so we're out of the postpartum phase and almost out of the toddler phase too. But it was years of feeling guilt whenever I would take time for myself. And something that I like to do is exercise. That's really fills up my cup. And I would always feel guilty when I would go out to the gym or a yoga class. And not too long ago, I had this aha moment, and I said to myself, like, why do I do this? Why do I exercise? It's for my health. I enjoy it, but it's mainly for my health. And I was like, I do this because I'm gonna live longer. I'm gonna have more years with my kids. So yeah, I'm missing out on an hour this Saturday morning to exercise, but this is adding to my life. And
Yeah,
that like reframe was a complete aha for me. So I've been trying to share that with other parents that
I
I
love
meet too.
that.
Like
No, I
thinking
think
about
that's
it more long term,
huge.
not just short term.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and when I work with families as a sleep consultant, right, I hear a lot of people being like, oh, I feel like so selfish for teaching my child to sleep because it feels like it's for me, right? Like it feels like I'm the one that's asking for more sleep and it's not fair to them that they're asking for XYZ from me, right? And I talk to families a lot about it. I'm like, no, but you're also teaching them a great skill. And even if you are, say, just doing it for you, which reality is you're not, you are now getting more sleep and you're now a better and well-rested parent in the morning. And so you can be more present for your child and more patient for your child all day long. Whereas before you were probably exhausted and running off of like caffeine fumes, right?
Yeah.
And so it's one of those things that like that reframe idea is like so much that goes along with parenthood. I did an episode about working out earlier and with a pelvic floor therapist a couple weeks ago and talking with her about, yeah, we have to reframe like just moving for 5 minutes a day at a time, right? Moving for 5 minutes here, 5 minutes there, doing a couple squats while you're doing the dishes. Like that's still working out even if you're not doing an hour-long workout, right? And just the reframe idea goes along with parenthood so much because I think that things are constantly changing and you have to kind of roll with the punches. But as society, like as we are, we have a hard time with that. So I think yeah, you bringing up the whole reframe idea really does. It can do a lot for your mental health postpartum for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just about kind of thinking of the bigger picture too when it comes to self-care. Yeah, you might miss out on that hour, but what is that hour giving you long term?
Right, absolutely. I love that. Now, are there things that you suggest to partners that they can do prenatally to help them kind of connect with one another? Or I guess it could be postpartum too. Like we said, going on dates is great. Being able to understand like cues to help each other out. Postpartum with mood disorders, or with helping them to feel supported. Are there things that you might suggest that people do or implement prenatally that might help them postpartum to feel like more connected in different ways, since obviously, you're not going to have as much time to be just spending the two of you and things like that.
One thing that I suggest to my clients is having a regular weekly meeting with their partner, and that's definitely something you can start prenatally as well. But I find it's particularly helpful, especially in that fourth trimester. And during that meeting, you can check in on how each person's doing. You can kind of create a plan to conquer the week because that's something, and I'm sure you see this too with couples during, especially those first couple weeks where it just feels like so chaotic.
Hmm.
Um, there's a lot, can be a lot of arguments over like dishes and laundry and all
Oh
these different
yeah.
things. So if you can have a meeting once a week where you kind of iron out who's going to do what, you get a plan going, and you're also checking in on how people are feeling. So you're kind of nipping any resentments that might be building in the bud. That can be very beneficial.
Oh yeah. Your point of kind of like even just the dishes thing makes me laugh because I do. I have a postpartum plan workbook that I work with clients with, and that's available for download. And I tell people, and one of the things in it is like the silliest thing about like talking about like food and meal prep. And one of the things is like, hey, how often do we feel comfortable like ordering out every week? Because I quite literally had multiple clients be like, I told my husband he's in charge of making dinner, and I came home and we're eating like, I don't know, something that's not a full meal, like for dinner, or he said he ordered pizza for the fourth night in a row. And so I find that for a lot of people, we said earlier, right, talking about things prenatally in a time where you're not having heightened emotions, can really kind of help to nip things in the butt. And so I love that kind of idea also of having that weekly meeting because also I think that it's so easy to get so fed up and so worked up by something in the moment and to kind of like react to that in anger or overwhelm. But being able to also kind of like think about things and then come to a rationalized answer of, okay, I'm going to come to this weekly meeting and hey, you did XYZ this week. That was really helpful. But, this thing that you did really kind of like made me annoyed. And I think finding a way to kind of create space and opportunity for people to have those conversations with one another is so important because otherwise it just builds up and people, like you said, resent one another for things that the other person doesn't even know, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I really encourage people, even when you say are postpartum, in the heat of the moment, try to not have those conversations then. Wait till you're a bit cooled off, and give yourself a minute and then have that conversation when everyone's kind of more at their baseline. Because they
Right.
really rarely are productive when both parties are at a 10. Um, and just kind of approach it like a team. Like, as a partnership, you're a team, you're trying to find a solution to the problem. Try to avoid finger pointing, or blaming the other person for being the problem, but approach the problem as an external thing that's not part of the partnership that you're both
Mhm.
working together to find the solution for.
I love that. I heard somebody at one point say, like, yeah, it's not me and you against each other, right? It's like us against the problem, which is how you were just saying. And I think that's so true. And I think sometimes in those moments, like, I've even found myself with my own partner, like, quite literally being like, okay, it's us against the problem. You know that, right? Like, because sometimes you do have to remember because it can get really overwhelming and really emotional. And when you add a baby to it, there's extra stress and anxiety and less sleep. And it's a lot more challenging to kind of I guess express your emotions sometimes in a way that is rational, but also expressing how you're feeling, because also that's important too. So I think that your point on that is so spot on, and I see it like quite literally with all of my clients. So that's great to know. And I had a question for you, and now I'm totally spacing on it.
I hate when that happens.
Oh my gosh, it's the worst. And I thought I wrote it down and I didn't. Well, I guess, is there any other types of things that you chat with families about that you feel might be beneficial for those listening to kind of know about when it comes to prepping with their partners? I know we went over quite a lot, but
Yeah, yeah, I mean, those are really the most important things that I talk about. To be proactive in and just really being aware of those signs of perinatal mental health conditions and checking in on your partner and remembering that your partner is also vulnerable to these conditions too. And when these types of conditions like postpartum depression and anxiety do manifest, it's not uncommon for them to manifest differently in
Mhm.
birthing partners versus non-birthing partners. So just be aware that for one person, it could manifest as sadness, whereas for another, it might manifest more as irritability or agitation or anger.
Mm.
And those are all symptoms. That's a message I've been trying to really talk more about lately, especially as
Yeah.
there's a lot more out there coming out about postpartum rage, is that these are actually symptoms. So if you find yourself like being more irritable or on edge or just not yourself, to be aware that those are signs of these conditions.
That's a really good thing to point out. I think that people really, you know, information about the mental health side of things postpartum is really coming out more and more. And maybe it's just that we're in that field, so I see it more and more, right? But I feel like before we really just heard about baby blues, and then you hear postpartum depression, and now we're hearing more about postpartum depression and postpartum anxiety and OCD. And then, like you said, yeah, now we're hearing a little bit more about like postpartum rage and things like that, which are more connected to postpartum mood disorders and are more symptoms of those mood disorders. But I think that things are getting more talked about now, which is great. But we also want to make sure that people realize that some things that are out there that you're feeling might be symptoms of these mood disorders that you may not realize. So that's really great and a great point to bring up. So I appreciate that. Well, I don't want to overwhelm anybody. And I feel like we've kind of touched upon all of these different topics a little bit. So we'll definitely have to have you back to dive in a little bit more on some of these things, but we'll keep it pretty surface level for everybody today. So you feel like you have a couple tangible check boxes to go check off with your partner, whether you're prenatal or postpartum. But I will make sure that Emily's information for her business is below. So you can reach out to her. And you said there's 42 states that you guys support, correct?
Yes, give or take. Around
Awesome.
there.
I love it. I love it. So you guys can definitely check out the website and see if you can connect with somebody in her practice that supports your state. And so we can kind of go from there and get you some support. Thank you so much for joining me and for chatting about this topic with me today.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for tuning into the Postpartum Plan podcast. I hope that today's episode brought you support, relatability, and valuable insight. Remember, you're not alone on this journey. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe and leave a review and share with any of your prenatal and postpartum friends and family. Your feedback helps us reach more parents seeking support. And if you're looking for additional resources, please feel free to connect via Instagram at Serene Moments Doula for constant information, tips, and tricks, or check out my website, www.serenemomentsdoula.com. See you next week.